Okay, so what I would like to do here today is introduce you to Logger Pro software. Logger Pro software is for taking measurements and readings from your vernier, force sensor, and GoTemp sensors. We use them in the Simple Machines lab and then also again in the Thermodynamics lab in your Principles of Engineering course. So what we'll do to open it up is go to Start, and we will go and search Logger Pro. And we'll go ahead and open up Logger Pro. You should have somewhere around the 3.11 range. I've got 3.9. I've yet to find what the difference is. So we should be fine to use that between the two. And when your window opens up, it will look like this. You have a graph out here that shows time versus some other graph. You also have a data collection set over here where it takes the two readings and records them. If you look right here above that, right below the new and open window, you'll see that it says no device connected. It has no device connected because I have not plugged in my force sensor to my computer. So right now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll take my USB cord and I'll plug it in. It takes a couple seconds for it to go ahead and load. If you have a dual range force sensor, the GoLink light on the GoLink should turn green when it's ready to go, and your screen should turn and do this. You'll notice where it said no force, no sensor connected, now it says go force, and I'm getting a live readout down here in the lower left hand corner of the force that's actually acting upon my sensor currently. Okay, you'll notice it also relabeled my axes, force in newtons in the y-axis and time in seconds in the x-axis. Okay. First thing I want to do is I want to set up how long we're going to collect data for. We're going to collect data for a set amount of time. Currently, it goes from 0 to 10 seconds. We're going to come up here under Experiment and Data Collection. You can also get to that window by clicking this button right here that is the data collection shortcut key. So you press that. We're going to leave it on time base and we're going to change this. We're only going to collect data for 5 seconds. 5 seconds is enough to average out our data and get a good force reading for our simple machine calculations. When you do this for thermodynamics, you'll set up this time for the length of the experiment to see how long to see how well your insulation works. Okay, we'll go ahead and click done when we're done with that. And now we are ready to take our initial force measurement of our weight. Okay, so we have to take a force measurement that is for our weight in order to calculate actual mechanical advantage. We have to know what our input force is. So the first thing I do is I orient the sensor in a vertical direction against something solid. And I will go ahead and click this button right here that says Set 0 Point, or I could come over to Experiment and 0. Both do the same thing. I like these buttons that are outside the menu, so I will click Set 0 Point. It's right next to the Collect button. And you'll notice my force sensor goes to 0. If I were to flip my force sensor over in the vertical position, you'll notice it reads a force because the weight of the hook and fittings are acting on the sensor. So now I have my 0, I have it back oriented in the right orientation. I will hang my weight that I'm going to use for my screw calculations from my sensor. When I've got it settled and I have the weight settled down and it's not swinging around, I will go ahead and come up here and click the green collect button. When I click the green collect button, it will collect 5 seconds worth of data. And you'll notice that over here it collected all 5 seconds worth of data, and it collected it every 0.2 of a second. Okay, so it collected 50 times a second. And we set that up, that's the default. Okay, so now we have this data, and what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and store that data for our weight. Okay, so we come up here and we go to Experiment and Store Last Run. And that will lock that in so that we can take another data collection, which would be the data collection as it acts on our simple machine. Now, when you get to doing the lever calculations for first class, second class, and third class levers, you could, in theory, take a reading for your weight, so the input force, and then you could also then take a reading that was for each first, second, and third class lever and store them all in one graph by just storing last run and store last run and store last run. Okay, so I now have my screw all set up and my sensor in place. You'll notice I'm getting a couple newtons of force. That's just how it sits in the screw and whatnot. I try to get that as close to zero as possible, but the way this is set up, it's fairly difficult. There, I got it a little closer, so we'll go ahead and roll with that. I need to zero my sensor again, so I'm going to zero it out. Always zero your sensor before you start taking data. And now I'm going to arrange my input force onto the head of my screw so that we can calculate actual mechanical advantage. We have the input force, which is the weight that I'm hanging from the head of the screw. And now we're going to measure the output force of the screw by allowing this to come down. Alright. And now that it's hanging there, I'll go ahead and hit collect data. And you'll see it runs a new blue line, which is quite a bit higher because of my input force. And once it's done collecting, then I can go ahead and take the weight off of my sensor and go from there. Okay? Now I need to analyze this data. I need to get the mean because you notice my data is not perfectly flat. It's really close because of the way I've set my simple machine up. If I come up here to this button right here that says Stat on it, about halfway through, if you hover over it, it says Statistics. If I click on that button and I go ahead and I want to do Run 1, which was my force, my input force, and then my latest force, which was my output force on my screw, and I go ahead and say, okay, I want to analyze both of them. Okay, you'll notice if I click and drag these around, I now have statistical analysis from here to here on both of these. It gives me the mean force as 28.41 newtons on my output, and my input force was a mean force of 1.548 newtons. You can see the high mechanical advantage of a screw, and when you calculate the ideal mechanical advantage of a screw, you will also see the extreme losses in a screw. Okay? If I want to save this data, I can right-click on this graph and copy this graph and put it into a Google Doc so that I could print my graphs and put in my engineering notebook. I can keep them for future reference to come back and look at if I need to. But that pretty well wraps up, how to run Logger Pro for analyzing your statistics. You always want to collect for a little while, especially if you're trying to take a single reading like a force reading and then use the stat button to get the mean reading out of there. You want to try to have your stuff as stabilized as you can. If I had a real bad reading area here, I can click on these and I can drag these in so that I'm not analyzing as much of my area. So if I had bad readings at the beginning or end, I can exclude them from my statistics so that I don't skew my statistics. Other than that, that's pretty much it with Logger Pro. If you've got any questions, get a hold of me.